So welcome back to the fourth and final session of this very crash course, Introduction to Race and Culture Studies, which is just a YouTube course, a very condensed version of a class I used to teach at the college level. So this is like YouTube level, meaning very condensed into just these 4 short lessons. So this is the last one, and I hope that you are just empowered by this lesson, because I know a lot of the information in lesson 3 could have been very overwhelming and even maybe depressing a bit. You know, some days it feels like when you hear about all the problems and the disproportionalities, the oppression, the racism, the issues in the world, human rights abuses globally, nationally, locally, personally, then it's just like, why would you even want to get out of bed in the morning? Well, this is why. Because you and everybody around you can be part of the solution. If there's one thing that we know in human history, it's that change not only is possible, but change is inevitable. So what kind of change, whether we're moving toward solutions or toward more problems, is just dependent on the people that get involved and what we do, not only in our immediate circle, but also how we interact and participate with the national level and global level of all of these issues. So we're going to talk today about what you can do to build a more just, equitable, and inclusive society. So I'll be with you through this. We're going to though jump to some PowerPoint slides to talk through, how we can get our boots on the ground and get active when it comes to the issues affected by race and culture studies. So just to review a bit, lesson 1, we talked about the 4 perspectives: the historical perspective, the psychological perspective, the sociological perspective, and even the art and literature perspective when it comes to addressing the topic of race, ethnicity, and culture. And we talked about how a lot of times in the news media, there will be a specific perspective given, that if all these 4 perspectives were at the table, instead of just one, we would have a more whole conversation about the topic. But a lot of times there's just one perspective or one angle emphasized in order to kind of hype up or dramatize things, to the ultimate level. So these are the 4 perspectives. We discussed, each of those, what they bring to the table. And then we also talked about the 8 conversations about race, ethnicity, and culture, and how we interact with individuals, whether at the workplace or at school, or even within our families or on social media, when it comes to these kind of 8 conversations that are happening about race in America in particular, and kind of things that people say and how those conversations play out, and how we can better engage in those conversations and kind of shape things toward a more helpful narrative that works toward equity, justice, and inclusion. So this is just a little bit of review. If you have any questions or about these 4 perspectives or 8 conversations, then for sure go check out lesson 1 and go through that. And if you still have even more questions after that, get the book Doing Race, 21 Essays for the 21st Century, because you can read then in the chapters about all of this information. So this is just review from lesson 1, and we're going to move on to reviewing lesson 2. So at the end of lesson 1, we actually discussed a little bit about definitions of race, ethnicity, and culture. And into lesson 2, then we kind of talked about, what are the differences between those 3 words, and how do we kind of trip up when we confuse, for example, race with culture or race with ethnicity, when those words really pack different vibes and different meanings for humanity. So race oftentimes being something that has a very negative connotation, like racializing somebody or saying, that group, like white people or black people or whatever. And then in terms of ethnicity, like talking about somebody's Nigerian roots or, certain, more specific ethnic origins or family traditions. And then culture being learned behavior and something that it evokes a sense of pride and belonging, as also does ethnicity, as opposed to a kind of like rejection or judgmentalism that oftentimes comes with the oppressive idea of race. So anyway, if you have any questions about those definitions, again, go back to the end of lesson 1. And then into lesson 2, we talked about then how race is not biological, but people act like it's biological, and then what the stakes are for individuals who are racialized when it comes to medicine specifically, like what racialized drugs are people being given, and what are the implications for a human body when it is categorized into a broad stroke group and treated, not specifically for that individual, but actually as more of that person being a symbol of a larger group. So the question about, the dangers of pharmaceuticals and racialized medicine was out there. And also just the reach of DNA science. Like, what does DNA tell us? What does DNA not tell us about race? Because, again, zoologically, there is no threshold that the human race meets to actually create separate races. So actually, we are more similar than we are different when it comes to a physical being. However, that social construct of race being kind of slapped on as a label to what really DNA points to ancestral origins and continental origins, and then also the migration of people over time and all of the human race, Homo sapiens, going back to the continent of Africa, and that being the motherland for all of us ultimately. So anyway, if you have more questions again about lesson 2 and the biology and science and medicine surrounding race and ethnicity and culture, go back to that lesson and watch that one. Let's look at lesson 3 and all those statistics and graphs. So looking at lesson 3, we discussed all of the kind of statistics about disproportionalities and how difference is actually institutionalized, how racism is actually institutionalized in American society and American systems of governing through education, housing, economic development, healthcare, political representation, public safety, etc. So the question then sometimes people have is like, if race isn't biological, then why is racism so real? Like, if race is fiction, then how can racism be truth? And it's because people have been operating on the basis of a lie for hundreds of years. However, this particular worldview of race has not existed forever. It hasn't even existed for most or even half of the history of human beings in the world. So it's a shorter, more recent concept. However, for anybody living today, it would seem as if it's been around forever, because hundreds of years obviously is much longer than any of us have been here. So to kind of think of a world where we do not talk about race is a foreign concept. To be in a post-racial society seems almost unattainable, because people continue to do race, as the book is called, Doing Race. Like, it's a behavior. So it's a state of mind, and it's something that we practice and we do and we repeat. And so that's what perpetuates the idea of race is this practice of racism and of grouping people into this hierarchy of white supremacy, essentially, where certain groups were deemed superior and certain groups were deemed inferior. And some people have tried to use that same system to kind of like turn things around and argue like which group is superior or inferior. However, it all goes back to that same colonial premise of race being something that is real, that divides us on a biological level, as opposed to more on a psychological level, more on a state of mind level. Like, you can defect from that worldview. You don't have to continue to perpetuate the idea of race, aka you don't have to continue to act out the prejudices, the stereotypes, whether in group or toward another group, that the race worldview has planted in all of our minds. So this is kind of something that we looked at in lesson 3. All of those disproportionalities, they are real situations. Racism is something that is real, that people face every day in America and even in other countries around the world where this worldview has been planted and nurtured and perpetuated. So I think that there are ways to challenge that worldview while still working toward justice and equity and shoring up these disproportionalities in society in all of these levels that racism crops up in all of these areas. So we're going to look at some very practical ways of doing just that. So a question I always ask my students is, so what's next? You know, you've actually learned a lot of information, and whether it's historical information, sociological information, psychological, etc., there is this need to act on the information soon after learning it, or it's going to evaporate. You're going to lose it and replace it with other things that you get either on social media or other things just incoming to your brain. So while you have information percolating in your mind, I think it's always the best time to do something about that information, to actually put that education into action. Otherwise, we're just going through an exercise of getting information and losing the information and getting different information or other information and losing that. And it's just a circular process that doesn't actually produce fruit. It doesn't bear fruit and grow. So this lesson is all about integrating the information from lessons 1 through 3 into your own life and really empowering you to develop a personal outreach plan that will make an impact. So the good news is there are only 2 ways to fail. One is to do nothing. And 2 is to be part of the problem, which I'm assuming if you're watching this, then that's not you. So let's look at ways to actually get involved and develop a plan to make a difference. So the approach I recommend, if this is your first time putting education to action or being an activist or doing something for outreach, is to start small, but don't stay small. So, you know, personal work really comes first, cultivating thoughts in your mind and ideas that are toward your values of justice, equity, and inclusion. So to cultivate that culture of like continuing education and improvement for yourself, and also to extend that to your friends and family, is really kind of like the pebble that drops in the pond and ripples out. So we're starting first internally, and then we're moving this externally. But the internal work is active work. So to retrain your mind to notice when judgmental or unkind thoughts enter your mind about a person that are due to group stereotypes or racialized ideas about those people or them, that group. So replace these fictions with truth about the idea that, you know, race isn't biological, that people are individuals with different characteristics and needs, and the idea of race, culture, and ethnicity being three different things and ways of developing a positive attitude, a more helpful approach to other people when we notice something that might trigger a stereotypical response. Also, to interrupt racist or prejudiced comments if you hear them, whether in person or online, because we know a lot of that's going on online, and really to stop participating in or to interrupt if you see microaggressions. So microaggressions are something that it wasn't a lecture we got around to. It's one of the many, 20 lectures that I did for this course. But microaggressions are basically really small things that build up over time, ways of pointing out difference, ways of emphasizing a stereotype. For example, like touching a Black woman's hair, or commenting like, "Oh, you're so articulate," as if you're surprised about a person of color, or, commenting about a woman's body. These things can build up over time. They have an oppressive, cumulative effect over time that some psychologists suggest is even a bigger effect overall than a more blatant once in your life incident. So something that we would label like, that's for sure a racist incident because you said the N-word, that would be called out by most people. But asking if, maybe a white woman asking a Black woman, "Can I touch your hair?" Or "Do you ever wash your hair?" Or "How long did it take to do your hair?" Or just different things, or like, "Your skin is so smooth," or just different things that like point out an us versus them dichotomy and make somebody feel, isolated or targeted, or even looked down upon, or whatever. Those things often aren't called out because they're more casual forms of racism or aversive racism or microaggressions. So anyway, that's what a microaggression is, if you're wondering. We can stop doing those things. We can also point them out when they are done, saying, "No, excuse me, that's not okay," etc. So engaging in organizations and activities that promote the values of equity, justice, and inclusion is another way to, ripple out from yourself toward people around you to then organizations and actually attending events. I know that as a former nonprofit director of more than one agency, I definitely got discouraged every time there was an event that was such a great opportunity to bring the community together or to promote these values of justice, equity, and inclusion, and then people wouldn't show up, or the people that I expected to show up didn't show up, and that was really discouraging. We did, have great attendance at a lot of things by pushing, but it was kind of like pulling teeth. Like you had to entice people with food or, extra things, extra perks or door prizes or whatever. And it's just kind of, like, why would you have to be actually encouraged or enticed to go to something that is promoting the very values that you claim to hold? If those are your values, then, you should be getting out there and participating and showing up at these events and activities. The fourth one on this slide is always vote. Again, this is something that's simple, but if you have the right to vote and you don't use your right, you don't exercise that right, it is a waste. It is a waste of everybody who has fought to provide that right to you. And I think that, ultimately people are going to argue about whether or not your vote makes a difference, yada, yada. But if you don't vote, you are, again, part of that problem. That is your position. You are throwing your vote in the trash, which means that your vote will not offset another vote, will not counter it, and or, will not support the cause, move forward. Like, your vote does count. So if 1,000 people have that idea, I don't need to vote, or my vote doesn't matter, then, a lot of local elections and even state elections sometimes are lost or won over less than 1,000 votes. So definitely always vote. And in a state like Washington State, you really don't have any excuse, because those ballots are mail-in ballots. So you literally get your ballot in the mail, you fill it out, and you put it back in the mail. It is so easy that to just throw that ballot in the trash, it blows my mind that people would do that. I mean, I understand. I've heard all of the chatter about, it doesn't matter, and the Electoral College, and my state is red or my state is blue, but you don't know if it matters or not if you don't do it. Like, if you actually do it, just in case it matters, do it. Just vote, just in case your vote does matter. And if you can go one step further and bring somebody to the polls with you, if you have to go to a polling place, or text a person and be like, did you get your ballot in the mail? I'm going to mail mine today. Just kind of, then you're doubling your vote impact. So beyond voting, you can also participate in a campaign. And I know, again, people think $5, what difference does it make? It makes a difference not only in who gets into the debates, which reach tons of people, millions of people, which then decide ultimately who is going to be a front runner in the primary election, but it also matters in terms of just demonstrating the numbers of support in advance of an election. So even if you only give $5 one time, that still counts. That is still better than doing nothing. So enough about those 5 kind of just top points of starting small and rippling out a little bit. Beyond that, I really feel like one question that often will stimulate action is, how far does your compassion reach? So, would you help someone who is bleeding or dying, like right in front of you? Most people would. That's an easy answer. Would you help somebody who is bleeding or dying a block away if you heard about it, or across town in another neighborhood, or in another state, or halfway around the world? Really, there is always a situation where there is a human rights abuse taking place. There is a problem happening. There is somebody suffering. And I think the question is, why are we not involved, or why are we less involved than we could be? Oftentimes it's because it's not right in front of our face. And that means that it's on us to seek out, to find the people who are in need, if our compassion reaches beyond what's the easy grab right in front of us. So how far does your compassion reach? Is it just right in front of you, or can you care about somebody who is out of sight, but are they still in your mind in terms of extending compassion and love to them? So again, starting with that ripple effect that we talked about in the last slide, starting with yourself, I really have kind of philosophy of this, building on the foundation of you, and then your family and friends, your local community, your state and national community, and also the global community. It's almost like diversifying a portfolio. If you're an investor, you don't want to just invest in stocks and bonds, because what if the stock market crashes? Then boom, you've got nothing to show. If you are investing your activism just in yourself, that stays very small. And, self-care is important, and it is important to retrain our minds, but to keep that moving, we have to circulate it to family and friends, and then to the local community, and keep building it out, because without that diversification of action in different places and with different groups of people and different causes, then I feel like there is a smallness to the work, in terms of what if one organization closes its doors, then, and you've invested all of your time volunteering and everything with that organization, so just looking at kind of expanding and doing these things simultaneously once you've expanded to the global level, then still being active in state, national, local, yourself, family, friends, etc. So my idea is to pick an issue that matters to you and create an action plan. And I taught this in my Young Advocates for Human Rights camp years ago for advocating that issue then becomes like your cause. You're going to advocate for education equity or whatever it is, locally, nationally, globally, and then you're going to work your plan. So plan your work and work your plan. And when it comes to money, and if you don't have money, like if you're a kid or something and you don't have an income at all, you can volunteer your time. But I think that with resources, 10% is kind of a golden rule of a starting point. The 10% rule is also biblical, like the tithe taken off the top. I'm not any longer involved in organized religion, so I don't have a church that I tithe to. And I feel like, however, I'm still a very spiritual person, and I'm still very caring and compassionate and want to do good in the world. And so to give that 10% of whatever you have incoming off the top, remember that 90% is for your kids and for you and for all the necessities and wants and desires that your family has. But that 10% rule as a minimum, I think, is really achievable for everyone because it's also sustainable. So giving to a cause can mean, it doesn't have to just be outright money, but it can be that if that's easier for you. But giving to a cause doesn't necessarily have to be scripted in a formal way. So you could give to an individual or a small business, support a small business, or give directly to an organization or charity. So think of creative ways in which you can kind of act. I know that some people question the validity of organizations or how much of your contribution is going to overhead and salaries and that kind of thing. So I've known some people that just invest in people. So just, give funds to people to kind of stimulate their life work instead of necessarily giving to an organization. I mean, whatever makes the most sense to you. I think at the end of the day, it's your funds. And like I said, if you're too young to have funds, like if you're under 16 and have no job, you can always volunteer 10% of your time, whether it's to your family or friends or to an organization in your community or even online. There are ways to participate and be involved, and think of like 10% of your social media time is going to be spreading information about causes or whatever. If you're, if you don't have any money incoming, but again, start with 10%. Remember, you've still got 90%. And if you need to pick up a little extra, a couple hours of work or something to make that transition, I think that ultimately it does pay off in the long run. So you're all still with me, right? So we're going to keep going through this. The next slide is how to pick your cause and develop a plan. So I really believe that we always do our best work when we are most inspired and passionate, not when we're mediocre or apathetic about something. So pick a cause that you care deeply about and develop a plan that fits your life and budget, or if you're ambitious, really readjust your life or your budget to really fit your passion. These are just some example causes that I've listed here. Again, you can research your own. That's number one. So if your cause isn't on this list, then definitely you can research your own cause and find ways of engagement locally, nationally, and internationally. So these are some of the game changer issues, though, that have been civil rights game changers: education, healthcare, criminal justice, public safety, political representation, economic equity, and human rights and the environment. I think that these issues, as the focus of my advocacy work, have really built a breadth of foundation for all the work that I've done. And I'll show you just briefly a few examples of things that I've done in each of these categories over the years. And again, there's a lot more to share, but just to give you an idea of maybe how to fill in this chart, if you want to work on many issues, maybe pick one a year or one a month, and develop your plan according to that. So this is kind of just kind of a look at some of the things that I have done over the years in terms of human rights cause advocacy work. Education, I really built not only just accountability in terms of going to the public schools, but through the NAACP, we built an education committee locally and had meetings, public meetings, and even videotaped sessions holding the school accountable for K through 12 education. And I also took my college students to the public school to tutor 12 kids of color who were not expected to graduate, not on schedule to graduate that year, seniors. And out of those 12 kids, 8 students did graduate on time. And again, there's a lot of intersectionality here because that is something that could kind of relate to education, of course, but also it jumps down to criminal justice because, as we saw in last week's lesson 3, there's a lot of relationship between graduation rates and incarceration, especially for Black males. So this is just, again, an overview. You don't have to read it all, but there are some ways in which I have advocated locally and nationally and globally for human rights causes. That is just an example of one way of doing things. This is my way. This is kind of based on my skill set and my process of organization. But again, I really do encourage you to develop a plan that fits your time, your schedule, your talents, your abilities, your resources. And, you could even do this with a small group of people, like, a coffee group or a book club or whatever, to kind of work with other people to achieve your plan, to make your impact even bigger. If you don't have an organization to work with, sometimes it can be a little bit insular and kind of, less inspiring to do work by yourself if you're a very social person. So consider developing a plan around a cause with a group if you feel like that would be more sustainable for you. So hopefully you're all excited and inspired to develop an action plan, plan your work and work your plan. But also keep in mind that along the way, track your results, keep track of what you're doing, because burnout and discouragement are really, they're common, they're almost inevitable if we don't track our results and kind of evaluate what we're doing, reflect on the progress we've made. Sometimes that can be super inspiring to even do more work, and sometimes it can mean that we might need to readjust or revise either our cause or our plan of implementation, or maybe, move from doing things by yourself to working with a group or whatever. But tracking results really can, this isn't just for breaking points or to put on social media. This is so that is your cause, is your plan actually improving something in the world? Is an impact being made? And I think that ultimately a lot of people don't engage in activism or don't, reach out to do something because they really believe that they can't make a difference, or if they try to make a difference, it's going to fail because there's so many forces working against change, and against progress that, why even get involved? But if you do get involved, you make a plan, you work your plan almost like working a business plan. You've got to track your progress and prove to your customers, if it's a business plan, or to your board of directors if you have a nonprofit, that your programs are working, that there is a reason to donate to this nonprofit organization. In your case, if you're just an individual doing advocacy work just kind of on your own, you still can track your progress and prove to yourself and your own peace of mind when you go to bed at night knowing, look, I have made a difference, and these are the ways that I've made a difference. When I started in 2019, this is where things were. This was the benchmark. And after I have worked my plan, this is what's happened. And this many people were reached. For example, back to the chart that I kind of filled in some of the things that I've done. My Young Advocates for Human Rights camp was a training camp really for middle school students to develop ways of engaging in activism as a teenager. And so Young Advocates for Human Rights, really just means that, like being a young person with time on your hands without bills and being able to use that time and energy to get engaged. So let me just kind of share with you one way in which one of my Young Advocates for Human Rights students, her name was Sarah, and she really tracked her progress of her action plan to show demonstrable results. And you'll see through this little story that the tracking of the progress can actually inspire and feed more action and more activism. So with all my Young Advocates for Human Rights students in the summer camp, I would always cultivate their minds by educating them about local, national, and international human rights causes or human rights abuses and problems that needed intervention. And so they would then pick one of those causes that they felt passionate about and develop an action plan for an entire year with specific measurable goals in mind. So one student picked international healthcare and specifically a city in Mexico where she wanted to intervene because she had researched and found that there were children who needed heart transplants or heart surgery who were not able to afford that surgery and therefore were not able to get the surgery and were then losing their life because of lack of funds for health care. So she actually developed a plan and called it Helping Kids Fix Broken Hearts, I think was what she called it. But she made tea towels and sold, I think, something like $30,000 worth of tea towels that she got funds and helped save the life of 6 kids. And so that was kind of like her measurement, or the tracking of her results was the incoming funds, of course, from selling these tea towels, but also ultimately saving lives. And how many lives did she save? So then using that as kind of a frame of reference for yes, I can make a difference. As a 13-year-old kid in North Idaho, I can make a difference. Or as a 13-year-old kid anywhere. That was, again, an international reach. Some of the students did local programs or action plans to develop. One student's concern was not getting global information or international information into his school, so he developed a news program for his school. Another student worked to counter the white supremacy groups locally in North Idaho, and he actually was very passionate about that cause because his own father was a white supremacist and he was raised with a parent who had that hatred, and he did not want to be his dad. And so he developed a plan for educating people in his neighborhood and in his community about the deception and the fallacies of the white supremacy worldview, the race worldview. So any of these things, though, can have like measurable results. And that's the thing that you really, can get excited about, is looking at the progress, looking at how many people you have impacted with your work. So I hope you can get excited about that, not only about developing your action plan, but also about tracking your results. So ultimately, you've got this. You are your own best resource. And if there's anything I can do to help, I'm here for you. If you'd like a review sheet, kind of a breakdown or a summary of how to make a difference, how to be that ripple effect in the pond, or if you even just want to share your progress with me, you can email me at radolezal77@gmail.com. Also, if you've already been engaged in activism and maybe you've got that burnout or you've hit a little bit of a wall, you can get re-energized with some courses at the Activist Graduate School online. So the cool thing about this is that it's a graduate school that you can just go to either part-time or for a course, and myself and other activists have contributed at no cost or no charge to the content of building the curriculum for this Activist Graduate School. And you can find that at activistgraduateschool.org, and you can sign up. And if you're already kind of mid-level or an activist pro and you want to move beyond protest or beyond whatever you've been comfortable doing, then I would definitely recommend the Activist Graduate School as your next stop. And finally, here are some resources that, if you have not yet tapped into them, that you might want to read, for further study before maybe deciding what your cause is or what your action plan is going to be. So Doing Race, again, the textbook for this course when I taught it as a formal college course. Fatal Invention, How Race is Recreated in the 21st Century by Dorothy Roberts. Race in North America, Origin and Evolution of a Worldview by Audrey Smedley. The Nature of Race by Dr. Ann Morning. The African Origin of Civilization by Jope. The Assassination of the Black Male Image by Hutchinson. Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis. Killing the Black Body by, again, Dorothy Roberts. And finally, The End of Protest, A Playbook for a New Revolution by Micah White. This is actually the book that really launched the Activist Graduate School that Micah runs now. And finally, again, just to remind you, your own biggest resource is you. Your passion, your energy, your talents, your time, your resources. Tap into you and connect yourself with a cause and get active. So I hope you've enjoyed this 4-part course. It's been very brief, but again, if you did not listen to lesson 1 or 2 or 3, you probably want to go back through my YouTube videos and find those other 3 lessons to build up to this one so that you know what we're even talking about when it comes to the review and so forth. If you've already purchased the textbook, you've by now read and seen that there's so much more to discuss. Clearly, I condensed this course from 20 lectures into 4 really short YouTube videos. So I hope that you are able to read some of those books and gain, broader understanding if you have the attention span for that. And just always remember, keep pushing forward. It is nice to be nice. In a time of negativity, adult bullying, cancel culture, all of the heaviness of what's going on in the world today and historically, it is so important to cultivate compassion. And I really believe that overall we need to cultivate a culture of compassion. If you don't want to be visibly involved, you can always support somebody who is visibly involved. We all need each other to really push forward and change, because the one the one thing that we know for sure, just like gravity, if we drop something, it's going to fall. If we do not do anything, things are going to regress. Things are going to go down, not up. So be a force of uplift. Be that force that defies the gravity of human depravity, in a sense, of racism, of oppression, of discrimination, of prejudice, of repression, of suppression, all of the things that pull the human spirit down. I really believe that we can be forces to counter that effect and uplift. So I'm wrapping up this 4-part course with this 4th lesson, and I hope that you can also just comment and let me know, if there's another one of the college courses that you'd like for me to condense into a real short summary of a YouTube course that I've taught in the past. Let me know. I'll show you the list right after this. And again, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the comments. So this is the list of college courses that I've taught in the past, and I've taught 15 courses, many of which I've written the curriculum either from the base up or developed curriculum on top of what somebody else had started in the past. So the Black women's struggle actually became known as African American women's history, ultimately. It initially, though, was really just a course that was graduate, post-baccalaureate, and undergraduate at Eastern Washington University, and is an upper level division. So it's a 400 level course, so a little bit more advanced. Some of the other introductory courses are kind of needed before that one. The African history, prehistory through present, really studies prehistory through present history across the continent, and is a great overview. Also a higher level course. This one obviously was based on RCST 101. And number 4, the Introduction to Africana Studies, another introductory course, but like, why have a Black Studies program or course? As many of you know, I started the first Black Studies course at Belhaven University, where I graduated from my undergraduate degree, and have always been passionate about Black history curriculum being integrated through K through 12 as well as college courses. So like, why am I passionate about that? Why are other people passionate about that? What is the need for Africana studies, not just for Black students, but for all students in America? And fifthly, the Black Women in Hair course is actually one that I developed myself, and it was really a course that was very empowering for Black women to take, but also something that anybody could take and learn more about the history, the philosophy, the practice, the art of Black hair. So number 6, race and ethnicity. That particular course is similar to, in content, similar to the overview that I did for this course. However, it had a different textbook, but kind of the intersectionality of issues as well as the differences between race, ethnicity, and culture. And then an honors course that I taught, as well as humanities and Africana studies course, Introduction to African American Culture, really was a course based on culture. So that kind of delved more into culture, like music and art and history, but not just history singularly. Another course that I taught was the 20th century African American history, so 1877 to present, and that kind of is self-explanatory, very volatile as well as quickly changing time from 1877 to the present. A lot of changes taking place, a lot of disappointments, a lot of, the failure of reparations. A lot of that information is in that course. Research methodologies in ethnic studies or in race and culture studies is another course that I taught. World art, so African and African American art history was my focus for that course. And then all of these other art courses as well, which would probably be a little bit tricky to teach online on a YouTube course, just because there are so many visuals that I do not have copyright for. So anyway, but if there are any of these courses that you feel like you would benefit from if I did a short condensed YouTube course on it, just let me know in the comments and I'll consider that. And as always, again, thanks for watching.